Okay, hi everyone. Before I start, I just want to thank Wittke Zuderman and Professor Serge Dumoulin for all their help in collaborating on this project. Okay, so as you all know, topographic mapping is a basic principle of brain organization, and topographic maps are known to represent the sensory and motor cortices. For example, in the visual cortex, the neural response to visual stimuli forms the retinotopic map that preserves the two-dimensional visual field that falls on the retina. Now, recently, a novel map for numerosity was found in the parietal lobe, and this discovery extended the notion of topography also to higher abstract features or cognitive abilities. Now, topographic maps are formed in early stages of development and are modified by specific sensory input during critical periods. But what we wanted to ask here is how constrained are these topographical maps to development? Could novel topographies emerge even in adulthood? So how could we test that? So we used here the unique tools of sensory substitution devices, or SSDs. These devices transform through a predefined algorithm one sensory modality to another. For example, vision to touch or vision to addition. Now, studies in past years show that subjects that are trained with these SSDs are able to infer different perceptual qualities of the sensed objects. For example, they can localize targets or recognize objects. Now, the SSD tool that we used here is the iMusic SSD, which was developed in the Amedi lab. The iMusic converts visual images into sounds. It does so by reading the image from left to right, column by column. Height is converted through pitch, and specifically we use the pentatonic scale, and time is converted, the x-axis is converted by time. Now the auditory stimuli that is conveyed by the iMusic, we refer to as the soundscape field. So let's see a short demonstration of how the iMusic works. So this rising diagonal should sound like propagating elevating notes. So let's see if it works. Okay, and what will be the next thing? I'll help you, it's dropping diagonal. And for something a bit more complex? Anyone? So this is a white circle that involves both rising and dropping notes simultaneously. Okay, now studies in congenitally blind that were trained with this visual to auditory SSD show that they have a brain activity in high order visual areas that are known to process different visual categories. For example, subjects that were trained in object recognition showed activity in the lateral occipital complex that is known to process visual or tactile object information. So what we want to ask here is how is the perceived iMusic space mapped in the brain? Will it be topographically organized like the natural senses? And if so, where would these maps appear? So what we present here is a case study with subject MM, who is congenitally blind. MM has been training in the lab in recent years and is a proficient iMusic user. He knows to recognize various visual categories such as faces, numbers, letters, and even to discriminate between different fruits and vegetables. And the way we used to map topography or look for topographical mapping is an adaptation of retinotopic mapping with a population receptive field, which you just heard about. And I will go over it quickly. So just as the visual bars sweep through the visual space, we converted visual bars into sounds, and the bars move along the soundscape field in 4 different orientations and 2 opposite directions. And at each orientation, 5 bars cover the entire soundscape field. So let's try to see a short demonstration. Okay. So PRF mapping is a quantitative model that predicts the fMRI time response from the visual stimulus. It has 3 components, the visual stimulus, the receptive field, and computation combining the 2 to predict the fMRI time response. So again, here instead of visual stimulus, we converted them into sounds, and they're represented in the soundscape space. So the PRF is modeled as two-dimensional Gaussian, and it is described by three parameters: the location of the PRF in X and Y, and its size. And at each voxel, these parameters are adjusted so the predicted fMRI response will best fit the measured fMRI response. So let's see how well our model fits the data. So to the left, you see an example of the fMRI time series and the prediction of the model from a voxel in V1 taken from retinotopic mapping in the sighted. It is an example from the Dumoulin paper of 2008. And to the right, you see an example of the predicted model and the time series in the parietal lobe of MM. So you can see that the model is nicely tuned to our measured time series. And if we look at the overall maps of how well the model fits our data, that is the variance explained by the model, we see robust activation in the brain. Now remember that MM has no visual experience and is only hearing auditory sounds. Yet we see robust activation in the visual cortex, in the occipital cortex, and in multisensory parietal lobe. So in the retinotopic areas, we see activation from posterior V1 to V2 and V3, and in both dorsal and ventral visual streams. Now, if we look at the PRF positioning along the y-axis, that again is represented by frequency, we see nicely tonotopic-like auditory maps in the auditory cortices. Now, these are tonotopic-like because we use natural notes and not pure tones as is usually done in tonotopic mapping. So this was, again, a good confirmation of the model and a nice reality check for us. And outside the auditory cortex, we see also nice topographic maps. We see maps in V1 and V2 and V3, in the lateral occipital complex, in the parieto-occipital sulcus, and in the parietal lobe. So to summarize so far, we found neural populations that are tuned to frequency not only in the auditory cortex, but also in the occipital and parietal cortices. And these populations are topographically ordered. So what about the other axis of the soundscape field? So if we look at the maps of the position of the PRF along the x-axis, that again is represented by time, we also see nice maps in the lateral occipital complex, in the parieto-occipital sulcus, and in the parietal lobe. But what I would like to focus in now are the two most interesting maps in the parietal lobe and the supramarginal gyrus. And what is interesting about these maps is that the map of time overlap in axis with the map of pitch, suggesting that the two maps together span the soundscape field. So to conclude, in this case study, we find that though MM has no visual experience, when presented with retinotopic-like auditory stimuli, it shows robust activation in visual and multisensory areas. And within these areas, we find topographic maps that correspond to one or the two axes of the soundscape field. Now, the overlap between the map of time and pitch in the parietal lobe suggests that within these maps, MM can identify unique position in the field, similarly or conceptually, like we can identify unique position in the visual field in retinotopic mapping. So these results suggest that topography, which is a fundamental principle of brain organization, is also not fixed principle of brain organization that can also emerge in adulthood after perceptual learning. So I'd like to thank again Serge and Vitke, and of course Amir, my supervisor, and the rest of the lab members. Thank you.